All right. I'm here with Mano Elia. How are you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing fantastic. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm a fan of your show.
Well, I appreciate that. I had heard your interview with Father John Valdez, and you had this intro going in and you were playing some of Buck's clips, and I texted Buck. I was like, "Hey man, you ever heard of this guy?"
Yeah, I think the next day after you probably texted him, he messaged me and he's like, "Yo, thanks for the shout out." I'm like, "No worries, Buck. No worries." So yeah, it was great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool, man. I was like, this is awesome. Oh, hell yeah. I love seeing Buck get recognized, man. Like he's the man.
Absolutely, fully agree. I've had him on both as an interview as well. I do a radio show as well, so I had him on as a guest DJ, and that was awesome. We went 4.5 hours.
Oh, that's cool, man. That's really cool. Well, let's dig into that because you have the same y'all are like basically like twins when it comes to your choice in music and all that. Are y'all twins also in your journey to orthodoxy? Let's dig into your past and see how that worked out.
Sure. Yes, to a degree, we are. Yeah, we definitely are twins when it comes to music. It was crazy. We finish each other's sentences and stuff. Yeah, in terms of orthodoxy, I'm cradle orthodox. So I was born Greek Orthodox, but I veered off into, I guess you could call it the occult, more than New Agey, I guess. For many years, I probably veered off around 1999 and came back to orthodoxy. Well, like serious about 2 3 years ago. There's a lot of stop points in between that, but yeah, some of the reasons why I came back to orthodoxy are similar to Buck's. Death to the world kind of shocked me, and I was like, this isn't the orthodoxy I grew up with. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't know where you want to go off there. From there, I can definitely go deep on either side of those, so the cradle side or how I got back into orthodoxy.
Well, let's how did you veer into the occult and into the subculture? Let's start there.
Sure, sure, perfect. Well, I was raised Greek Orthodox, like I said. My I was very, I would say, devout till about grade 7 or 8. From there on, I kind of started doing more secular stuff. Got into music. Well, I was always kind of into music, but I started asking a lot of questions. But I still had Jesus in my heart. I still felt I was Orthodox. I still referred to myself as Orthodox. But I would say around the late 90s, I started to go deeper into the occult and New Age stuff. My reason for going into that down that rabbit hole was actually consciousness. I just wanted to understand what is that thing that I see when I look into the mirror that looks back at me. Right now, I have a different definition of what that is, but that was my original reason for going into the occult. So I spent a lot of time in that world. As far as subculture is concerned, I've always kind of been into punk and different forms of subculture my whole life, and they kind of fit together with the occult and the New Age. So it's kind of even hard to separate them to a large degree,
Mhm.
as well as the Orthodox stuff too. I'm starting to find a lot of punks and people in the subculture being attracted to Orthodoxy, which is a big part of what I'm trying to do now with my show. So to answer your question, I veered off because I was really looking for consciousness, the understanding of what it is, and I kind of written off Christianity, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to find it there. I kind of got into more of the Jordan Maxwell style of explanation of Jesus. I don't know if you're familiar with Jordan Maxwell, all those conspiracy types, where they do like the sun worship and they try to make it all
Right.
about
Right.
that kind of stuff. The
About
Gnostics.
astrology. Yeah.
Yeah, I got very heavy into, predominantly I was into Hermeticism. If you're familiar with Hermeticism,
Hmm.
more so than anything else. That's really where I spent my time. And it piqued my interest because of a lot of their principles made sense to me. Particularly the stuff that's in the book The Kabbalion. They have 7 principles in there. The 7 principles are literally things that are hard to deny, like cause and effect, vibration, all things vibrate, rhythm, all things are mind. These things kind of started to make sense. I've heard you make reference to Gnosticism more than a few times.
Hmm.
Gnosticism and Hermeticism are very tightly connected. So I spent a lot of my time there, and oddly enough, that was one of the ways I kind of got out of the New Age and into Orthodoxy, is when I took the stuff that was in the Kabbalion and I flipped it and realized, okay, this is the there's something about these questions that they ask in Hermeticism but they don't have the answers. And then by the time I got to Orthodoxy, I realized Orthodoxy did have the answers. So yeah, my interest was predominantly consciousness, to answer your question, and then obviously that's what attracted me to Orthodoxy. It's the best explanation for a lot of those things. In terms of music and subculture, like I said, they're all combined and they're all unified.
Yeah. Well, I was laughing when Buck mentioned Rush and how he hated Rush because I grew up my dad was a huge Rush fan
Uh-huh.
and Zeppelin and Sabbath, and I grew up on all that. So
Yep.
that kind of led me a little bit down a different path as far as music goes because I entered into the progressive metal phase
Mm.
before I reverted back to punk.
Right.
It was kind of like I backdoored my way into the punk phase, and that
Uh-huh.
was through bands like Nirvana or I don't know if you know who Down is, Phil
Yep.
Anselmo's side project. And he played with a guy named Mike Williams in another band that was a punk band. I can't remember the name of the band off the top of my head. I feel horrible. It's been a long time since I listened to it. But so Mike Williams was with a band called I Hate God, and
Mm-hmm.
they played like this really sludge doom, like slow kind of it was almost insane because the riffs are real hard, like kind of like Sleep, like real heavy,
Yep.
hard, doomy riffs with like screaming and
Mm-hmm.
but you could hear like the punk influence. And whenever I got into like Mondo Generator and stuff like that, you could really start hearing that punk influence. And then I met a guy who was really into Propaganda and Operation Ivy and started hanging out with
Yeah.
him.
Yep. Yep.
Then I found my way into punk, but this was long after I had been like neck deep in metal, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah, well, that those two worlds collide very like often. Like they're always
mm,
like whenever you like Father Turbo, when I interviewed him, he made this joke about calling metalheads Hessians, and I was like, yeah, I remember that, and how like there'd be battles in the parking lot between the punks and the metalheads. But there was a moment where everything kind of combined, like where everything
mm.
kind of became like the same show. Like the example you gave
Like
with Sleep.
DRI
Yeah,
kind of put,
exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Exactly, exactly. And then like even later on with like bands like Pantera and this and that. I mean, a lot of people overlook the fact that Metallica technically is a thrash metal band originally, which is taking punk and taking British metal and putting
hmm,
them together. They forget the Misfits are as big of an influence to
yep,
them as like, Iron Maiden or whatever, right? So
yeah,
people
yeah,
kind of forget that. But it is weird the subculture that our era experienced, because it was like as you mentioned Nirvana and a few other bands, that was like a moment where they all kind of mixed together, all the subgenres kind of fell into this one pot and they all got melted together, and then later on they separated again, but they did melt together at the late 80s, early 90s mark. You know what I mean? It was a strange time, very strange
yeah.
time
I
for
mean,
music.
even like Anthrax and even some Megadeth, you know,
Mhm.
if you can go back and you can find Dave Mustaine doing covers of like the
Yeah.
Ramones and stuff like
Yep.
that.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it was just weird because I was always kind of like snobby towards punk because I was like, it's so
Yep.
simple and it's so
Yeah. Yeah.
fast. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, like anybody could do that. I could just go do that, you know? And then I
Totally.
started digging into it and I was like, oh, wait, like some of these guys are really good, you know? So like
Absolutely.
I remember seeing Jay Church at this little club in Houston and just having my mind blown. I was like, oh wow, these guys are really talented. They're really good.
Oh yeah. Oh
They're
yeah, for sure.
super real tight. Like, and I don't think I understood that when I first like the first time I was exposed to punk. I didn't think I understood how in order to play that fast and stay
Mhm.
in time, you had to be
Mhm.
really tight. You really had to have
Yes.
things together.
Absolutely, and then the drummer is very important in punk, especially
Mm.
hardcore. Like, there's also that distinction between hardcore and early punk rock,
Oh yeah.
especially hardcore bands. You need like the drummer is crucial, crucial.
Right. And yeah, I
So,
mean, I look at some of my favorite bands, like especially bands that I listen to nowadays, the drumming is my favorite part to listen to, like Gajira.
Mhm. Yep.
That dude's awesome. Thomas Hawk with Meshuggah is just insanely good. This
Absolutely.
that the time changes, even like Danny Carey with Tool. is
Oh yeah, he's
incredible
incredible.
with the time signature changes. But that's always why I like the progressive, like growing up listening to like Rush and Yes and those types of bands. I was so used to those time changes, and it kind of engaged my mind, like the way you were kind of engaging your mind philosophically by like trying to look for the stream of consciousness. My
Mhm.
mind was being engaged artistically through progressive metal, and I didn't get into philosophy until I was in my 40s. So, you
Yeah,
know,
no, I get it. The progressive, like, I was never big into progressive rock. I actually kind of started looking back, like when I got older, I started to look at some of the progressive rock stuff, and then that's when I started to appreciate it. Because at first, for me, it sounded like Buck will tell you the same thing. To us, it sounds cheesy, right? And then it's like overindulgent, right?
mm,
And then when I got older and I started playing more in myself, and I stared to look, I'm like, okay, you know what got me into progressive rock or looking at it? It was Primus. It was Les
oh,
Claypool because he's a
which
proggy
is
kind of guy, you
incredible.
know. Totally. Him and like Tool. Those are the two bands I'm like, okay, maybe I should go back and look at some of these older bands. You know what I mean? And then I took a different look at Yes. Yes didn't sound so cheesy to me after I'd listened to some of those bands. But I could
Yeah.
see how philosophy, you can go from prog rock to philosophy for sure. I could see that. I could
Yeah.
easily see that.
Yeah, I guess it just because the how complicated it all was, it just kind
Mhm.
of like what it wrapped up that part of my brain that was like
Mm.
that wanted to experiment. And so I got more into partying, than anything else. And that's what like actually I left the church basically because of partying, because I was out there partying, and then I went through my second divorce, and in both my ex-wives, I remember sitting down having a conversation with them and telling them like why aren't you praying about this, because I would
Mm.
still go to church like every weekend, but I was out there doing all kinds of wild stuff. It was like
Mhm.
I was a Sunday Christian. Every other day I was just doing whatever.
Yeah.
And I would ask him, why don't you pray about this and see if it's the right decision? Especially my first wife, when she filed for divorce, she goes, "Oh, I did, and God told me to divorce you." And I was like, I don't think
Wow.
that's the God I
I
know.
don't think so. I don't think so. That's not. Were you Orthodox at that time or Protestant?
No, no, Southern Baptist, yeah,
Southern Baptist. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Okay, okay. That's yeah. It's yeah. I can yeah, it's strange looking at life backwards, right? Like when you get to an older age and you kind of look at a lot of the experiences and things like that that you had and try to make sense of them from this point of view, it's totally different. It's totally different.
Mm, mm.
Like even your perspective, like you're saying partying led you out of the church and then, in some ways it kind of led you back, I guess. I'm gonna guess because that's what often happens, right? You end up like
No, actually, it was, it's weird because Buck and Matt Erickson,
mhm,
myself, and a couple of other guys just all kind of simultaneously found ourselves on this path to orthodoxy. And the big influence was Lord of Spirits.
yeah.
And so I spent a lot of my time, especially after my second divorce, I spent a lot of my time writing horror stories.
Mm,
And so listening to Lord of Spirits, it was like registering with some of the stuff I was kind of rooting my stories off of. And a lot of it I didn't even realize I was using. I was utilizing all these different narratives, and I was leaning on a lot of like this classic belief system that I didn't
right.
even really recognize that tied together. And when they started tying these threads together for me, I was like, huh, I need to look deeper into this. And then I discovered Father Turbo, and, and really, but, and then Buck was kind of along the same lines as me, but he
Mhm,
took his curiosity and focused it into his podcast. Whereas I kept talking about politics and culture and stuff like that. He
yeah.
started moving in this different direction, and I just never missed his podcast. So I was kind of following him along this journey.
Mhm,
And so, yeah, we all kind of ended up in the same place and right around the same time, and kind of simultaneously in different ways found our way to this subject and just started traveling down that road. And you had mentioned Jay Dyer when you were talking to Buck about him being such an influence on. I found it very funny because I listened to Jay Dyer for like 4 years,
Hmm.
and never heard him talk about orthodoxy, or maybe I did and
Hmm.
it just never registered what he was talking about because I was listening to him for the conspiracy stuff and,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that good jazz. And so I just never like, especially his geopolitics. He's really good in geopolitics, and so it just never tied in with me with that's what he was talking about until I was already going down the path, and I was like, oh crap, okay, you know.
Yeah, 'cause I'd heard a couple of you guys' conversations that the three of you guys had on a couple of episodes. You, Matt, and Buck. So I kind of heard a lot of the libertarian stuff as well, which I kind of got into myself. In terms of like Jay, they're really yeah. It's funny how we all kind of have similar stories. Like maybe some subjects overlap, or one or two, or maybe three or four. Like whether it be libertarianism, subculture, anarchy of some sort. You're gonna end up at the
Mhm,
truth, right? That's usually the case. With Jay, it was weird for me because, like I was saying earlier, I grew up cradle Orthodox, and then I remember around 2014 listening to Jay talking, and he just threw it out, Eastern Orthodox. I'm like like Russian, Serbian, Greek, really? Like at that point, it hadn't even computed that other people were interested in Eastern Orthodox, because when you're a Greek kid growing up in Toronto and you tell someone you're Orthodox, they're like, "What are you, Jewish?" Right? Like they don't even know that there's this whole other type of Christianity. So yeah,
mhm,
it was weird because like I was listening to a lot of Jay Dyer for the same reasons you were: geopolitics, conspiracy stuff, all that stuff.
mhm,
And actually, the very first video of his I saw was on Carl Jung, because I was doing a deep dive on Carl Jung. This is like 14, 15 years ago. But
mhm.
anyways, going back to the point, yeah, it's weird how all of us have similar tie-ins, and how we all ended up in this one place, and basically our only search was the truth. Really, I think that's the common denominator now, after having interviewed a bunch of people asking about subculture. That seems to be the common denominator. I'm going to guess it's the common denominator with you too, from your story and what you've been telling me.
Yeah, yeah, it was just I just kept following the rabbit down the hole, man. I was just
Yeah,
kept
yeah,
looking. I was like, all right,
yeah,
where is this going? I'm
yeah,
reading all these books and this ties in with this, so I got to get
yeah.
that book and read it, and that ties in with it, and it just all kind of tied in together. And then I started reading Father Seraphim Rose,
Oh yeah,
Nihilism, I think was
yep,
the first book of his I read. And I was like, oh, this makes sense. Like I see this in
yep,
culture. Like
yep,
I can see this. And then I think right around the same time that I read that, I'd read James Burnham, Suicide of the West. And so I'm
yep,
like, yeah, this all makes sense. Like
yep,
this is
totally.
all making sense to me. And then it was shortly after that, it was what was it? Uh, Antichrist and Global Civilization or whatever came out by Uncut Mountain Press.
I don't
Buck
know it. Oh,
interviewed the author. I can't remember the name of the
oh yeah,
book.
yeah, yeah. Now that you mention it, yeah, I think I
Oh, here it
saw
is.
that episode with Buck.
Antichrist, the fulfillment of globalization. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I read that, and then that started tying in like the political to the spiritual for me.
Right.
And I
Exactly.
was like, wow, and it blew my mind. And then
Exactly.
it was like, I don't know, a couple of weeks after I read that, I was talking to Buck about it. And he was like, oh yeah, by the way, I'm about to have that author on. And I was like, oh no way. And so I was stoked about that. That was a really and now I think that's kind of where I started really noticing the overlap
Yep.
between politics, culture, and the spiritual world, and
Hmm.
spiritual warfare, which you talked to Father John about a lot. I began to really recognize that overlap.
Yeah, I think it's an important one, because like uh, I'm kind of bouncing around in my story on how I came back to Orthodoxy, but a lot of it had to do with that spiritual warfare and understanding the geopolitical spiritual warfare that's being done to us, not just in the sense of the book on unseen warfare, but also the way the Antichrist will come, the way the passions are presented to us and may get us caught up into the world, the devil, and the flesh, right? And for
Mm,
me, I gave a talk at Anarcho Poco sponsored event here in Mexico called Mariposa Freedom Festival, and at that time I was kind of going through this bizarre crisis where I was kind of like leaving my old hermetic beliefs and kind of moving closer to orthodoxy because of all the guys online talking about it, like yourself and everybody else, and Buck and Jay and everybody else. So I was going to give this one talk that I had to scrap. And anyways, the point is, I started to like, I just made up the speech on the spot and just kind of spoke from the heart. So going to kind of Father Seraphim Rose and trying to speak from the heart. I had read Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. I'd read
Mm,
Nihilism, and I realized that Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future is literally a conspiracy book from the perspective of an Orthodox priest and soon to be saint. And excuse me. And it kind of shook me. At the same time, I'd read this document called Changing Images of Man. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it
mm,
was released by Stanford Research Institute in the 70s and 74. And I had started going through this document that I had put off for many, many years to read, and realized that everything that I was experiencing was completely social engineered. And so and culture creation ran far deeper than I realized. And what I mean by that is it described all the kind of new agey occult stuff I was into. It explained all the stuff that became popular in the media and the news, which is also very similar to what's described in nihilism. And it started, and a lot of the people that were behind this project were authors that I knew, like Joseph Campbell. Everybody references Joseph Campbell in the new age occult world. And I'm like, this guy is in charge of this social engineering experiment. And Carl Jung's tied into it, Huxley, a guy named Irvin Laszlo, who's like deep in the new age world. So, anyways, this started to spin my wheels internally, and I started to realize, okay, this stuff isn't making sense. And I started to piece together the spiritual combat, the spiritual warfare with the geopolitical stuff that you're interested in and many of us are interested in. And it started to all make sense that really when you pull apart all the pieces and you open up that onion and you move around all those layers, what you're really at is something that seems cartoonish, like a cartoon Luciferian kind of like when you explain it to someone that's not into like Orthodox or doesn't believe in Christ, and you start telling them it's all a Luciferian plan. Maybe not so much now because people are kind of seeing what happened the last couple of years. But before
mm.
that, they'd be like, "What are you talking about? This isn't some sort of cartoon." And you're like, "No, no, no. Wait a minute. Look at Luciferian principles and invert them. You get this. You get orthodoxy." So after having given that talk at that, going back to the Mariposa thing, I ended it towards the end and asked everyone, "This is an anarchist, agorist convention full of libertarians and such." And I said, "Who here believes in monarchy?" And nobody put their hand up except for me. And they all kind of pushed their chairs forward, like, "Where are you going with this?" And I said, "By the time I'm done talking, you'll be a monarchist as well." And I started to describe to them not monarchy from the Orthodox perspective that I believe today, but
Mm.
just basically that if you don't have control of your own self, your own mind, the way you view things, if you're not the controller of you, if you're not that one ruler of yourself, then someone else is going to rule you. They're going to socially engineer you and move your mind around and or your eyes around and make your attention, put your attention where they want it to be put. So to kind of tie up what I'm trying to say is that I think a lot of these rabbit holes, a lot of this subculture stuff, whether it's music or libertarianism, I view that as a form of subculture and all that. That they do, if you got into all those things for the right reason, and the right reason being truth at any cost, you're going to end up here. I really do believe that. For anyone that's out there, I think they will end up at orthodoxy if you're really interested in the truth. Sorry, that was
One
long winded, went all
No,
over the
no,
place.
you're fine. You actually like made me think of something. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is overstimulation.
Mm-hmm.
And that the purpose isn't to get you to to be an alcoholic or a drug addict or any of these things. The purpose is to put you in a situation where you're constantly stimulating your mind.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
the dopamine, you're getting the dopamine constantly, in that
Mm-hmm.
you're never in silence and never in a place of meditation and
Mm-hmm.
talking to God, right?
Yes.
And so as long as you're constantly under the care of stimulation of some sort, whether that's you're changing your life from
Mm-hmm.
being um uh, addicted to food and fat, overweight, and you start working out, like you're still stimulating yourself in that way. You're never taking that time to be present and in peace and talking to your maker. And as long as they can keep you from
Yep.
experiencing that, then they're happy with wherever you're at.
Absolutely, because that's how they control. I mean, that's it's called an attention economy for a reason, and the reason why social media is designed for that very thing of robbing your attention. And now, data collected from attention grabbing gadgets like our phones is worth more than oil nowadays. Like, there's a reason for that, and that's because of this very thing you just said. If you can control someone's attention, and they say it in the New Age a lot, where attention goes, energy flows. If you just kind of look at that from the Orthodox perspective, it's a very true statement. It keeps you away from God. It keeps you from ever asking, what is that one thing inside me that does speak to me when I listen, when things are quiet, when things are not chaotic. Yeah, I think it's a very important part. And a lot of the stuff that got me back to Orthodoxy as well with that document I referenced was the Tavistock Institute doing a deep dive into them,
Yeah.
and then reading reading them directly saying that they're going to create this kind of environment for us, and that was their intention over 70 years ago to 50 years ago, between 50 and 70 years ago, depends on how far back you want to go. That was their intention. So they're telling you flat out what they want to do. And if you go
Hmm.
back in time and you look at these things and you look at the present, all of a sudden, what's that book called? Amusing Ourselves to Death by oh, I forgot the author's name. Oh God, I'm going to be doing a video about it soon. But it was basically he's talking about amusing ourselves to death, and that's the culture we live in today, where all we're going to be doing is creating entertainment and images and videos just to entertain ourselves. He wrote this book in the 80s. I can't believe I forgot the guy's name. I'm so sorry. Anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that I fully agree. Attention is what they're after, because if they can control your attention, they can control the narrative by how they seed the story that you tell people, both about
Hmm.
yourself or society or anything, because everything has been about identity, right? For the last
Hmm.
7 years, politics. Well, if they control who you are, if they make you avoid thinking of who you are and rather think of what you are as your identity, they got you. Like the what are you is like, are you white? Are you male? Are you this? Are you that? If that's what you're
Right.
identifying as, they got you. Instead of who you are, like who are you as a human? Are you made in the image of God? Well, if you have
Hmm.
that perspective, that's a totally different worldview.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. The it's like what Aldous Huxley said about Brave New World, and he said that it was a blueprint
Mm,
of how to form civilization, and the amusement. Let me see if I can figure out how I wanted to say this. So that system of amusing yourself to death. Okay, so here's the easy way. I'll use myself as an example.
mm-hmm,
I used to be able to sit in complete and utter silence and just watch the grass grow.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
and that was, as a child, that was like my favorite thing. I would just go sit outside and just watch, squirrels and animals and just chill. That was like my favorite thing to do. And I've noticed here over the last couple of years, I wake
Yep,
up, right? And the first thing I do is grab my phone, put in my earbud, and I turn on a podcast. And I catch
yep,
myself doing it.
yep,
And I'm like,
yep,
what am I doing?
yep.
And then I'll get in the shower and I'll still have my AirPod in because it's waterproof and I can continue to
Right.
listen to the podcast. And and
Exactly.
I and I catch myself doing this. And so I have to make a conscious effort, you know, to sit still and just be in silence. And sometimes when I went through my second divorce, I went over the road. I already had a CDL, but I went over the road. I had never driven over the road. I'd always driven kind of regional. I would go to Oklahoma, but I'd be back at Houston the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I went over the road. I spent 2 months in complete silence, no radio, no nothing, and
Nice,
just
nice.
drove and thought, you know,
That's
and
it.
now my thoughts led me to the wrong place, but that's fine. It's I don't know. It would take me a lot of training to get myself back to the point where I could do that. It's just
I understand. Yep,
I've been so conditioned
yep,
that where it's always podcast, audiobooks, something's in my ear at all times, go, go, go. It interrupts, it interrupts my prayer life, it interrupts everything, you know. And
yep.
I recognize it, and I'll take my earbud out and I'll set it down and I'll be like, all right, I'm just going to be present for a little while. and I'll be sitting there and I couldn't tell you how much time passes by, but before I know it, the damn thing's back in my ear and
I know.
I'm listening to something else or I'm searching my phone for something. And
I
I'm like,
know.
what is
I know.
wrong with me? You know,
I
or I'll
know.
grab a book and I'll read like one page and I'll be like, okay. And I'll set it down and I'll put my ear and I'll turn something. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, what?
It's
I don't
true.
even care that much about what's being said. It's just that constant feeding, you know, and it
It
just
is.
drives me crazy because I recognize it and it still drives me up the wall.
For sure. And our age group, we can remember a time when none of this was even an option, and we remembered how our minds used to work. And now we're looking like, can you imagine the kids now that have no reference points? Number one.
Right.
Number two, the odd thing is we study this stuff, yourself, myself, culture creation, how they're trying to manipulate us, all this stuff. So we know what's happening, but yet we're still going along for the ride. It's crazy. Oh, the book that I just looked it up as because it's a good book. It's called "Amusing Ourselves to Death" by Neil Postman. That's the name of
Neil
the book.
Postman.
And
Okay.
it's funny that you brought up Huxley there because he has a quote. I couldn't find it. And I'm not going to sit here looking for it because then back to gadgets. But basically, he quotes. The quote is that he compares Huxley with the Orwell, and he says many people think that the life would go into. He thinks that Huxley will win or has won, not Orwell, and that we're going to be. It won't be that people won't will have like books censored or books burned as they are in Brave New World, but it'll be that they won't even be interested enough to even read the books.
Mm-hmm.
Like they'll be so inundated with mundane information, and we just sleep. We're literally swimming in a sea of mediocrity because of these types of things. And
Mm-hmm.
like amusing yourself to death um, is what we're doing. It's literally what you just described a day that I had that same day today. Like I had a podcast going on in the shower, everything you said, same things. Going to the gym, all this stuff. Like my only alone time is when I'm praying, and
Right.
even like, and it's weird because I have many years of meditation under my belt. I should be able to do it no problem, but like
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of lost something in the last couple of years, and it's weird. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but I think it's a good one. Isn't it weird how we view time since the whole COVID thing? Like I was talking about it with my daughter and many of my friends. Things either feel like they were a million years ago or like 5 seconds ago. Like events that
Yeah.
happened 3 years, like it's like time shifted in a bizarre way. And for me, I think a big part of it has to do with the like my phone. I use it differently since COVID. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not the same. Like, do you
Right.
find that?
Yes. And well, I found that being over the road for as long as I was over the road, I started depending on my phone for everything.
Right,
It just became a crutch for me. And
right.
so, but COVID was weird for me because I was a truck driver at the time. I was driving over the road, so I wasn't really affected by anything. And I
Mm,
live, because of where I live, where I was driving, nothing really bothered me.
right.
Um, there was a 3-week period where all passenger vehicles coming into Texas out of Louisiana were getting stopped and tested by state troopers, but that didn't last very long. And that was
Mm,
odd to see. But for me, COVID really didn't, I would forget about it. I would walk
mm.
into truck stops, wouldn't have a mask on. And, like the lady at the behind the counter would be like, why aren't you wearing a mask? I'd be like, because I'm not going to rob the place. Like what, like, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it just never even registered. My wife, she was working from home already. So the only time she would leave the house is to go to the grocery store, go to the post office. And here in this little town, they only observed COVID for like a week. And like the grocery store insisted that they wear masks for like 1 week. And then they just dropped it after that. They were like, screw it, we're not doing this. I don't know why we even tried. And
You're
so
lucky, man.
yeah, so it really didn't affect either of us, but I would be reading news stories and I'd be like, this is not the reality I'm living in. Like I didn't
Yeah,
recognize what I was seeing. Like I'd
yeah.
read something and I'd be like, where are you people? I don't understand what's going on. Everything and then, every once in a while I'd see somebody wearing a mask. I remember this clear as day. It made me laugh so hard. I was delivering to a Walmart in Metairie, Louisiana, and this lady is wearing a mask and
Okay.
driving her car, which was norm seeing people wearing a mask and driving her car. But what was funny was she took a right on red in front of a tractor trailer without turning her uh, turn signal on. And I was like,
Safety man.
are you really worried about your safety? Like, you just, uh,
I know.
it was
It's
one of the
so
most
weird.
absurd things I ever saw. I was
It's
like,
so
what
weird.
is happening here? I walked into a
I'm from
tobacco
Toronto.
store. Oh, go
I'm from
ahead.
Toronto, so it was totally different. Like what you're describing is foreign to me. Like when COVID hit, it was totally the opposite. Sorry, I didn't mean
Oh
to
yeah.
interrupt you. I'm just saying
No, no, that's all
it's
right. I was just laughing because one time I walked into a tobacco store in Beaumont up the
yeah.
road, and I walk into this tobacco store and this guy looks at me, he goes, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "You got to put on a mask." I said, "Dude, I'm buying tobacco to smoke. Do you think I care about my lungs?" You know, like this is like, I
Uh,
don't get this. Like, what's happening?
yeah,
You
it
know?
was a crazy mind game, dude. It was a crazy time.
Oh, it was wild. My wife, we went to the Apple store because my wife needed a new phone because her phone like went kaput. And like I said, she hadn't been leaving the house. And we would go there. Neither of us are thinking about it. We go to Beaumont, go into the Apple store, and they're like, Miss, you got to wear a mask. Miss, you got to put on them. And they're freaking, they're panicking. She goes back out to the truck. She gets a plastic bag, cuts eye holes out, and it puts it over her head and walks back.
I love that. That's so awesome. See where I'm from, like it was the exact opposite. It was like the Apple store everywhere. It's
Yeah.
like that. I wish I had thought of the bag. I would have done that.
Oh, I got
Okay,
told I
that's
actually
so good.
bought a Lone Ranger mask just for when people would tell me to put on a mask.
Boy, I love it. I love it. That's so awesome. Yeah, I wish I was in Texas back then, or even
Yeah,
general. I think Texas is pretty awesome. It's like
yeah.
I think
We
I
had,
keep
I mean,
saying it.
we were having fun with people, but we live in a little bitty town. We're on 9 acres. I didn't know nothing. Like when I'd either be on the road or I'd be at the house, and it was like nothing was happening. You know,
Yeah. Meanwhile, the rest of the world, man, the lockdowns, man, dude, they were nuts.
they
That's
were
what I mean
going
with
insane.
the phones. Like that's how I started using my phone 10 times more because you're just stuck at home. What are you gonna do? You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
like you're on your phone.
right,
But
right.
anyways, it was a strange time.
Yeah, and it's just even even when you're like think you're like absorbing something good, really, how
Mm,
much of it are you actually intaking? Really, you're just shutting your
yep.
mind off.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
it's just you go to autopilot and it's just noise coming in. I know there are many times I'll look down at my phone and the podcast will be ending and I'll be like, did I even listen to that? Like, I don't remember anything. I don't remember a thing that was just said.
Yeah.
Like, and I rewind
Crazy.
it and I start it over and like, okay, I remember this part. I remember this part. And as they're talking, I'm like, yeah, I remember I'm saying all this, but I just went completely brain dead. And I don't know
Yeah.
how the podcast ended. I still absorbed most of the material. I remember they said it. I remember hearing it, but it's like it flips the switch in you and it just turns you into a drone.
It's true. It's true. And that's back to the attention thing. Like that's what they want you at that. Even with like all the like whether you're a conspiracy theorist or whatever you want to call it, or a libertarian or whatever, they just want you going around and around in this like little gerbil. What is those little hamster wheels, just going over and over again, and just kind of listening to things, watching things, listening to things, watching things, post some things, listen to things, watch things, post some things, but never do anything. That's usually what most of their like the and they're really good at what they do, man. They've trained us well,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially at that time.
Well, and it's not until you get like that wake up call in Orthodoxy or something like that
Yeah.
that you realize like you're aware of what's going on. It's like it's kind of like, getting unplugged from the matrix. You're like,
Hmm.
"Oh,
Yeah.
okay. This has been happening." That's what
Yeah.
I was doing.
Absolutely.
And what was really hard for me, and it's been a struggle for me, is it's so easy to just turn back and just turn it back to where you were. And I'll
Hmm.
do that. I'll find myself doing that. And I'm like, okay, wait, it's been 3 weeks, and what have I been doing? And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh crap. Yeah. I've been wasting my time. I haven't been, assertive. I got comfortable or it said, or I'll find an excuse, like last year when my wife got bit by a copperhead and then my son got shot. And it was just like, it
Oh.
was so easy. My attention was so caught up in this over here. I'm not paying attention to what I'm supposed to be doing over here. You know what I'm saying? And it's just because because of the way I've lived my life and being kind of like the sole provider for so long that
Mhm.
it's like all that weight falls onto me and I don't think about what I'm supposed to be doing, for my spiritual life or for myself.
True.
I'll put off doctor's appointments or dentist appointments or whatever. I'll just like I can wait. Whatever I have going on can wait. I have to
Mhm.
put all my attention right here. This is what I have to do. And I do that. And then it's so hard to get back on track.
So
You're
true.
it's like climbing uphill and the hill's just gotten steeper on you for some reason.
So true. Well put. That's I'm experiencing that now actually after Lent. I did pretty good at the whole thing. I've done it before in the past, but this one in particular was bizarre because I used to do it when I was a kid, 40 days, no problem. But this one was a challenge. But I find myself reverting back to certain things after Lent, going, oh, well, it's over, take a break, do this or that. And then
Right.
and even like what you're referring to, like old habits or taking care of yourself, like looking at the my time with God and in prayer as self work, let's call it, and because it
Hmm.
really is, and like putting that off for the next day to the next day, the next day. I find myself doing that a lot lately, so it's
Yeah,
hard to get yourself back.
this Lent for some reason was last year Lent went real smooth. It was just a
Yep.
breeze. Like my wife and I, she started putting together a cookbook with Lenten recipes and just she would be because she loves cooking. That's like her favorite thing. And so
Hmm.
she would just be researching recipes. She would find a new recipe, she would make it. It was good. She'd throw it on a document and we'd share it with people, you know?
Awesome.
And
Awesome.
so we really spent a lot of time last year doing that and trying to help other people get through it. But this year, man, for some reason, I had such a hard time. Um,
Yes.
Part of it was work, and
Hmm.
I understand that. For the last like 3 months, I've been the only driver at work. The other guy, so everything's all the weight's been on my shoulders, and I would find myself in situations where I had nothing to eat, and it was
Hmm.
like I have 5 minutes today to figure out what I'm going to eat. I have to stop and get fuel here. And if I don't grab something while I'm at this truck stop, then I don't have a chance to grab anything. And so I would just be like, screw it, just give me a piece of pizza. I don't care. Just I got to get through this day. And
Yeah. Yeah.
then I'd start feeling sorry for myself and being mad at myself. I'd be like, well, I already screwed up. Might as well go get a 6 pack
Yeah.
and sit on the porch. Like
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
it then does wake up the next morning. You idiot! What have you been doing? What are you
Yeah.
doing with
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
life?
Yeah. Yeah.
It was just this constant cycle, and it started off first couple of weeks started off really well, and then after that, it was just this constant struggle, and I was just like, oh, and I felt like I was just in this, and I felt like I was just in a fist fight with myself most days.
Well, this Lent, like I said, I've done it when I was younger, and I don't remember it being this hard. But this is the first Lent I've done in like maybe 20 years, like a long time. So, but I was doing it. My nephew started doing it as well, and we started doing the radio show during Lent again because we had done it last year. We stopped and we started doing it every Sunday, kind of like because we couldn't take it, and then everyone started sending us in for like, dude, this is like the worst it's ever been. The spiritual attack is at its like everybody was feeling it. The only person I know that said that this was an easy Lent was Buck. He's the only person I know that said this Lent was easy. Everybody else was like spiritual attack, spiritual warfare. I can't take it. Like I'm being tempted. Stories like yours,
Yeah,
all this stuff, and it was like like lives falling apart. Mine definitely during Lent, and I was like, "What is going on here?"
yeah, it's just it was just wild. It was just
Yeah.
it, uh, and then I'd be like, oh, screw it, I'm not having a 6 pack, and then I'd be like, and then Saturday rolls around, and my wife's like, because my wife is atheist, she's not observing, And so she's like, "Will you grab me a case of beer?" And I'm like, "Well, screw it. If I'm getting you a case of beer, I'm getting me a case of beer." It was just one of those things, and it was just the spiral, just constant spiral. And I woke up the other morning. I think it was like Sunday, and I was sitting. I get home, and I'm sitting. Actually, no, I was slept late. No, I woke up and I thought it was Saturday because I ended up having to work on Saturday, and I haven't been working on Saturday. So I woke up thinking it was Saturday. So I'm sitting outside drinking my coffee, and my wife walks out. And she goes, "You're not going to church?" And I looked at the clock, and it was like 9:30. I was like, "Well, I guess not." And because I was like, "It's
Yeah.
Saturday." She goes, "No, it's Sunday." And so we argue about that for like 10 minutes. Of course, she was right as always. And so I look, and I'm like, "Well, I guess not. It's already 9:30. I haven't even showered. I haven't done anything." She was like, "Fine." So she comes walking outside and she cracks open a beer. I was like, "You didn't bring me one?" She goes, "Oh." And so and I'm sitting there and I'm drinking this beer and I'm like sitting there and I'm going, "What the hell am I doing?" Like I'm
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
such an idiot, feeling
Yeah.
sorry for myself, like I'm some sort of victim. I better get off my butt while I still can and start doing stuff. I want to be around for my kids and my grandkids and all that. And so that kind of has put me in a different mindset this week. And it's just a matter of putting one foot in front of the other and just going, you know. Well, I think we froze up.
Yeah. You're frozen. Is it me or you? Let's see.
I don't
We
know.
good?
You were frozen there for a minute, but it might have been me. I don't know.
Yeah, because you were frozen on my end, so well, it could be me. It's probably the Mexican internet here, man. It's it's always
It's
crazy.
all right. It happens.
It's, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, no, I was saying like it's crazy how we resort back to like habits and stuff like that. Especially the last like year, I've tried to like really like do some be a better Orthodox Christian and like do things the right way. And I find myself like doing really well for a good stretch, and then all of a sudden something happens and I have like a bad week. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, and exactly like you said, like, what am I doing with myself? Get up and
Yeah.
go do something.
Well, I'm a truck
Being a
driver, so
loser.
people think I'm crazy because I'm driving on the road, slamming my fists into my steering wheel, just yelling, just raging like those chicks that pay $4,000 to go out in the woods and scream.
I saw that. I saw that. Wow. We should start something, dude. We could, we could do like a boot camp in Texas and what I'll do one in Mexico and we'll split the profit. It's nuts. What's wrong with
Yeah,
people, man? They're paying for that.
I get
Oh
paid to
man.
do that. I don't know what's wrong with them.
True enough. True
And it
enough.
keeps cars away from me.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Clears traffic real fast. You see a truck driver driving down the road at 65 miles an hour doing that. You're like,
It's
all right,
awesome.
get out of this guy's way. He's about to kill somebody.
You ever thought of podcasting while you drive?
I've tried it.
Yeah.
I used to wear a blue parrot, and so it
Hmm.
was only on one ear, and I would record while I was driving and just talk about thoughts, about the culture, about what I was seeing going on, etc. And then I would release it. And my buddies, man, they would always, "Oh, I love it, man. I love it, blah, blah, blah." And then I looked at the reviews one time and this guy goes, "Your show would be really good if the sound wouldn't only play in one ear." And it was because I was using that headset. So
Yeah.
I stopped using that. So I got me a laptop because I was recording it on my phone on this app. And I would
Yeah.
even, when I would upload it on the app, I would say, go to stereo mode, but it still
Yep.
played in just one ear. And so it was like, I was like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "Thanks, you jerks, for letting me record podcasts for 7 months like this."
No, you were supposed to hit the mono button. Not, that's why. You have to hit mono.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. So if you
Yeah.
go do that and you hit mono, it'll go into both ears. I'm
Well,
a
I'm not over the
sound
road
guy.
anymore. I'm home every night now, so
I know.
I get to record from the comfort of my own home.
That's awesome, dude. That's awesome.
So, but I did. I got my laptop and I got my mic and a headset, and I used my phone as a hotspot. And I'd sit in the cab of my truck with the curtains pulled and just
Yep.
record. And that's how I recorded for a long time. Like I'd conduct interviews like that. Some people would have to, and it was kind of freeing then. Now I have to try to keep it to like 7 p.m. to make
Mm.
sure I'm home from work in time because I never know if I'm going to be home before 6. And so it was a little more freeing then because I had to take an hour break at some point in time during my day,
Right.
within the first 8 hours of my day. So I could actually do daytime interviews. So I would roll up into a truck stop, park the truck, shut the curtains, hook everything up,
That's
get on the
awesome.
Zoom with the guy, record, put everything away, open the curtains up, and get back on the road and take off.
Oh, that's cool, man. That's awesome. That's so DIY.
Yeah. So
That,
I was doing that. I was doing it like that for a long time. Probably the last, I don't know. Well, all of COVID, that's how I was recording. Like,
very cool. Very
yeah,
cool.
up until up until 2021. So from like 2019 to 2021, that's how I was doing it.
That's very cool. I like that concept actually.
Yeah.
I want
It
to
was
do. I want
just
to go on the road and do it
if I wanted to podcast and still drive truck, I had to figure out a way to do it. And you know,
for sure.
uh, and I wasn't home every weekend, so I couldn't just say, well, I can only record on Saturdays, and then that limits who you can record with and all that. So I had to figure out a way where I could record with people. So I did.
Very cool.
So
So you don't drive truck anymore?
I
Like, well,
do,
I
but I
mean, like
drive
across
local.
local. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
cool, cool.
yeah. I deliver lumber here locally, and so
Very cool.
yeah,
One
I don't
second.
mind it. We all good?
Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Sorry about that. My
No, that's okay. I was
something
just
wrong with my
making sure.
internet. No, we're good. We're good. We're good. Sorry.
Okay.
It's just it's that
Yeah.
Mexican internet, man. I don't know. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I'm so sorry.
there
It's
was
always the best.
there, there was an old Lord of Spirits podcast. Like I think it was like their first year recording, and
Yeah.
Father Stephen DeYoung down in Lafayette had really bad internet, and they started picking up this Mexican radio station, like in the
That
middle
sounds
of
right. That's
it was
awesome. That's
hilarious.
awesome. That's awesome. Oh, I wish I want that to happen to me. That'd be amazing. Yeah, here it's funny because sometimes when we're doing the live stream on for SOS Radio because we go for long hours, our internet here it's like 1 hour straight you're good, and then all of a sudden it starts to get choppy, and then it goes back to good. So every once we had to like actually make little clips to play in between because we knew for sure the internet's going down. So we just have these like little clips ready to just hit play. And my nephew just hits play whenever the internet goes down. Okay, there Mano's back. He's back. Hey, how's it going, guys? So that's how we deal with it. It's crazy. It's crazy.
That's wild. You got to get inventive whenever you want to do something, Sometimes
Absolutely.
you never know when things are going to go wrong, and you got to get creative. And that's kind of like it's kind of what I've been thinking about lately about um how to get back into reading and
Mhm. Mhm.
how to get back like more on track with my prayer life and all that, especially after the Lent I had and being so frustrated with myself and my failures. I've been like, well, I got to get creative. I got to start working with what I have available to me. And so it's not a shortage of books. So
Yep.
how do I manage? And so I'm thinking about like, maybe putting my phone away for like an hour or something every day and just putting it somewhere and leaving it. And, you know, and that used to drive my wife crazy because back in the day, I would leave my phone at home and she'd get so mad. What if something
That's
happened?
awesome.
And I'm
That's
like, I'm
awesome.
going 4 minutes down the
I know.
road.
I
What's
know.
going to
I know. It's
happen?
crazy.
What did we
Crazy.
do before there were phones?
That's the thing. It's like everybody forgot this. Like everybody like completely forgot especially our era. Like you totally forgot what it was like, dude. It's like going back to earlier in the conversation. Like I think like a lot of the stuff that we experienced when we were younger, we don't appreciate it as much anymore. Like I mentioned it with when I had Buck on, like little simple things of like waiting for an album to be released. Now we have everything at the fingertip. You just click a button and boom, you have every album, you have every song. You don't appreciate it. So it's like, yeah, what do we used to do? That's such a good question. That should be an episode. I should do what did we used to do? Like when you go
Yeah.
to the store, standing in a line, you can't even stand in a line anymore without pulling your phone out. Remember when we just stand in a line for the sake of standing in a line? Like it's
Hmm.
just you stand in a line, you got to
Yeah.
buy a
You
pack
just
of
had to
cigarettes, you got to
stand in
stand in a
line.
line.
And if you
That's
were
it.
alone, you weren't talking to anybody or, you know,
Exactly.
unless you
Exactly.
like made friends with the person in front of you. And a lot of times that's how you met people because you're
That's
just
so
in
true.
line and you have no choice but talk to the people around you. Especially
Absolutely. That's
like,
so true.
especially if you were at like a grocery store and the electricity went out or
Yeah.
their system went down and they couldn't
Yep.
check you out and you're just kind of standing
Yep.
there for the next 45 minutes. You're just like, la di da. And nobody
So
was,
true.
I mean, maybe we were in a hurry to get somewhere, but it never felt like we were in as much of a hurry back then as we are
Right.
now. You know,
Yeah, and also
maybe that's
isn't it
rose colored glasses. I don't know.
No,
So,
I remember that too. Like I think people also it's weird because we have a phone now. So if you're gonna be late, you can message someone and say, I'm gonna be late. You still feel more pressure than you used to when you would show up. You're like, where have you been? I'm like, oh, this thing happened. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah. And everyone kind of was a little bit more understanding. Everything felt less rushed. I think it has a lot to do with how we use our technology too. It just moves
mm,
at such a quick pace. Like remember watching like an hour of anything, it wasn't a big deal. Then they went from an hour to like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and now it's like 30-second clips, and you're like already bored. Like even when I make clips for like
mm,
trailers and stuff, I started to realize because like as I'm editing, I'm learning the psychology of what people want, right? Because I can
mm.
know they like this clip, and I'm noticing like you can have the same shot, and if it just moves a bit and you just add extra movement to it, people are far more entertained. And now it's come to the point where like I don't know if you've seen this, like there's a lot of videos where someone's talking and literally someone's playing a video game in the background, or it'll be just like a picture of a roller coaster or someone cutting a watermelon and the person's talking. It has nothing to do with it at all. It's just two
Really?
images of two pieces of information. So kind of going back to like your idea about like listening to a podcast and like did I hear anything? Did I remember anything? And then you go back and you listen. You did. Well, subconsciously your mind is being it's being played with. So you have two images happening. One person's talking, and then you have an image of someone playing a video game. Your brain's obviously picking up both. Consciously, you think you're paying attention to the person talking, but subconsciously, your subconscious is watching the person cut the watermelon or whatever. So
Hmm.
not only do we need 30-second clips, we need 30-second clips with multiple movements, multiple shots, and multiple camera angles. And it's crazy. Like if you go watch, we watched Pump Up the Volume a couple weeks ago here in my house,
Mm.
and my nephew and I that have been doing a lot of editing, we're like, dude, why is it moving so slow? And I started using some clips for our show, and I took the clips and I sped them up like 5 times, and they seemed fine to me. But when I was a kid and I watched it in slow motion, it was fine.
It was a
But
great
now
movie.
it
Yeah.
was a great movie. But now you have to speed it all up. It's crazy what they've done to us. Like the social engineering is ridiculous. It's through the roof. It's very evident too. It's very, very evident.
Yeah. And it's, it's weird because it's almost like what you're doing
Mhm.
is you're playing in to what they've
Mhm.
done to people, but it's
Yep.
almost like in order for you to get the
Yep.
message to people, you
Yep.
have to play that
Yep.
game. And
Exactly.
it's almost it's like six one way, half a dozen another. It's
Uh-huh.
like if people don't buy into the message that I'm giving, then I'm just adding to the problem. You know?
Exactly. And that is the part that sucks because you know what you're doing to them. And like so that
Mm,
I try when I do my edits or even when I mix music, I do use forms of like what would be what okay, let's put it this way. If you can hypnotize someone for a positive way or a negative way. And what I mean by that is when you go to an Orthodox church, you're experiencing your five senses are engaged. Okay, the
mm-hmm.
smell, the sound, the colors, everything's engaged. Even the geometry of the building and the structure is designed in such a way that it amplifies sound. So it is a form of hypnosis, but not necessarily in a negative way. You're communing with God. You're going there to do that very thing. You could take those exact principles and invert them as the Satanists love to do, and then you can put in subliminal messaging, and then you can actually move someone towards something negative, right? So if you're looking at it from that standpoint, and that's kind of how I look at it when I'm mixing music or I'm mixing or editing a video, is like I have a responsibility here. What is my intention? And my responsibility is the viewer that it isn't aware of why I put that one cut. So you saw the intro that I did with Father John Valadez, and I put in the Minor Threat song, and then it was like a break and Minor Threat. So if you go back and you look at some of the clips, I'm not saying you should, but I purposely did it in a way where it would program you to actually absorb the second portion of the clip, and the second portion of the clip was him talking about Christ and talking about to us Orthodox, the perfect human is Christ.
Mm,
And the way I got someone to pay attention to that part was by, in the beginning, getting them in a state, a form of altered state, that they're hypnotically open to suggestion so that they can absorb the second portion of the clip. So I had made two clips and I did this experiment where I showed it to people, and the information was the same. The length was the same. The only difference was the cuts. They picked the one that did what I just told you. the information was the same. They didn't understand it the same. So the first one was just like him talking about that concept, and I kind of moved around all the images, and they didn't really understand the whole. They said, "Oh yeah, that's really cool that the song was there." And then the second time, which is the one that I put out, I showed it to them, and they're like, "Wow, what he says about Christ, that's really deep. I want to watch the rest of this episode." And I'm like,
Mm.
I see. So that's like something that I think for all of us that are content creators, whatever we do, whether it's a podcast or movies or whatever, it is a responsibility, and it is a form of hypnosis, and you have to take those things into account. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes you have to do those things, like you said, to get the person interested to even watch it. So
You're
it's
like the
crazy.
Orthodox Bernays.
I don't know if that's a compliment, but it's funny that you mentioned that, because the book that's holding up my laptop is the Tavistock Institute by John Coleman.
Oh yeah.
And Edward Bernays is a massive part of that book. Well, I learned a lot from Bernays, and not well. That sounds horrible, but I learned a lot about his techniques before knowing that they were his techniques that were being used against us in propaganda.
Mm.
And what I meant by that is my background is Greek. So if you look at a lot of the techniques that the ancient Greeks used positively and negatively to influence people are very much mind control, and there are definitely things that Bernays ended up using. So, for example, the hypnoteria, where they would go and they would sleep, and that's where the word hypnosis comes from. It means to sleep. There'd be a form of medicine where someone that was ill would sleep in these little chambers, and a doctor would whisper subliminal messages to them as they slept. Kind of like what
Mm.
you were talking about with the podcast. Your subconscious mind absorbed the information. Your conscious mind thought you didn't absorb anything, and then you went back to listen to it, and clearly you had absorbed the information. So these techniques have been used from the beginning of mind control, but they're just like I gave example with the Orthodox Church. It can be used positively. So I'm the Orthodox Bernays. Yeah, I guess so. I'd rather not Bernays someone else, but yeah, I guess that's what I'm
No,
trying to
but
do.
I mean, you're
I know, dude. I
obviously
know.
taking the ideas that are put in front of us through advertising, and have
Yeah.
been developed,
Yes.
from the concept of television up to
Yes.
the internet, and you're obviously have learned what those concepts are and
Yeah.
are able to utilize them for your benefit, and that's good, man. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, yeah,
You
no,
know.
I was just kidding. Yeah, that is exactly what I'm doing. That's why our tagline is re-engineering their social engineering. The whole idea and premise of what I've been trying to do now that I have a purpose, because I started the channel like 15 years ago, but it's a long story. But only in the last little while, even a couple of years ago, I started podcasting, and I didn't have a purpose. I didn't feel like I had a purpose, although I was getting really good guests and this and that. When I did my interview with Father Turbo, I'd already been going down the Orthodox path. Something about that interview clicked something inside me, and I felt I had a purpose. And I was already deeply immersed in social engineering and culture creation. So one of the taglines for the show started to be re-engineering their social engineering. If we know
Mm,
how they engineered us, how they culture create us, how they navigate our attention to therefore program us with different narratives. If we know how they're doing that, A, not
mhm,
only can we identify it, but B, we can revert that. Like we can reverse that, right? So I think if they've inverted everything that is Christ-like, everything that's beautiful, everything that's natural, everything that's real, if they've inverted all of these things, well, what
mm,
happens if we reinvert them? And like, it's bizarre. We live in a world. I was talking to Father John, or most of the people I've been interviewing recently, and I'm hearing what their version of rebellion is. Their version of rebellion is what you talked about earlier, taking care of your family.
mhm,
You know what I mean? Like saying something logical, having
right.
something to provide to society, you know, uh, demeaning the role of certain jobs or positions we all have is an inversion in the negative sense. Like, for example, a woman, they're told to be empowered, but the most empowering thing a woman can do is they make humans inside them. Can you do that? I can't. That's a pretty empowering thing. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And then you drive a truck. Someone might not look at that as an important thing, but it absolutely is. That's a lifeline of our entire society.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? And the thing is, back in when we were younger, I remember respecting everyone's job. I remember my dad telling me that. I remember strangers telling me that. I remember someone denigrated the janitor, at my school. And I remember a really great teacher come up and he just gave it to us. And then we found out later I wasn't the one doing it; gave it to the kids doing that. I felt really horrible for him because my family's blue collar, old Greek immigrants, like that's us, right? Like, you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? And the point I'm trying to make is if we could just re-engineer their social engineering and take everything that they've programmed us with, if we know how they did it, we can flip it, identify it, and re-engineer things, and we can put things back in place in order, hopefully, before it's too late. You know what I mean? And I think that is an intention I have. And when I do mix or make videos or whatever, I have that in the back of my mind. Or even when I accept an interview or however I'm going to present myself from this point on, I'm trying to do that in every which way I can. I'm not good at it, but I'm trying.
No, that's good stuff, man. Well, it's been an hour, and first interviews I always try to keep them right at an hour, and I think that's a good place to stop. We covered a lot of information and got a little silly there, but real but silly at the same time, because that's how I express myself openly and honestly, is I just make jokes about it because I find myself to be
Love
absurd.
it.
Um, so plug whatever you got to plug, man, and we'll get you out of here.
Yeah, I guess the study of stuff. You can find most of our things at our website, manoelia.com, or our Patreon, on YouTube, Instagram, and everywhere else. Where the study of stuff. Yeah, just we do a Sunday live stream radio show called SOS Radio. We play a lot of Orthodox content as well as other music, and we just mess around, just like we just did now. Just mess around, play music, and
Cool.
have fun.
And what's that tagline again? Reengineering.
Re-engineering their social engineering.
I like that. Okay. I'm gonna have to remember that.
Awesome.
Cool,
Well,
man. All right.
thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it, my friend.
Yeah, man, it's been fun. I'm just gonna stop the recording. We can chat for a second after.